So far, I have demonstrated half-blind dovetails, where the joinery can be seen from only one side of the drawer. The Omnijig can also cut through dovetails with variable spacing, where the joinery can be seen from both sides of the drawer. This type of joinery is very beautiful and is usually only seen in fine quality handcrafted furniture. The Omnijig can cut 3/4 inch dovetails in stock up to 13/16 inch thick, or 1/2 inch dovetails in stock up to 1/2 inch thick. I will demonstrate cutting the 3/4 inch dovetails. The equipment needed to cut the adjustable through dovetails includes your router, the adjustable through dovetail template, the long and the thin spacers which come as a unit with the template, the 3/4 inch dovetail cutter, a 5/16 inch straight cutter, and a 5/8 inch guide bushing. The 5/8 inch guide bushing comes with your basic Omnijig. Points to remember when cutting the through dovetails include: all pieces to be cut, both pins and tails, will be held under the front bar clamp. All cuts will be made on one side of the Omnijig. The top clamp will always hold scrap backup material that is at least 1/4 inch thicker than the material to be dovetailed. Here you see I have a 1/4 inch spacer underneath my 3/4 inch material. This is required so that the cutter will not cut into the base of the Omnijig. The tail board is cut with a dovetail bit, and the pin board is cut with a straight bit. To set up the Omnijig to cut through dovetails, place the washers on the bracket rod in this order: the large spacer, 3 black washers, and a thin spacer. Additionally, adjust the rod nut so that it is within 1/16 of an inch of the base of the Omnijig. Do this on both sides. Next, to cut the tails, reposition the washers and place the Omnijig template in this position. Tighten it down. Position the bracket in the same position on the other side and tighten it down. The tailboard is positioned under the front clamp. I have removed the left stop block and butted the tailboard against the left stop and flush against the underside of the template. The Omnijig through dovetail template differs from all the others in that the pins and tails can now be variably spaced. This gives you the ability to begin and end each dovetail cut with a 1/2 pin. Additionally, you can create your own pattern of pins and tails. For this demonstration, I'm going to use 4 of the template forks to cut my tails in this board. You'll notice that I have pre-marked my board 7/16 of an inch from the edge on both ends. This will guarantee a 1/2 pin beginning and ending in my dovetail cut. I reposition the outside forks so that this inside edge lines up with that 7/16 inch mark and tighten my set screw. I do the same thing on the opposite side of the board. Next, I can position the inner forks anywhere I want to create the pattern of pins and tails that I desire. Next, I reposition my backup board with the 1/4 inch spacer behind my tail board. Butt it firmly against the tail board and lock it in place. The router is prepared to cut our tail board with a 5/8 inch guide bushing and a 3/4 inch dovetail bit. The depth of cut is adjusted for the thickness of the pin board plus 1/2 of an inch. Set the router on the Omnijig template and check to make sure that there is clearance between the cutter and the base of the Omnijig. Next, you will carefully guide the router in the template fork slots to cut the tails on the tail board. Be careful not to cut in other areas. The Omnijig is now set up for cutting the pins. The template has been positioned so that only the thin washer is behind the bracket and all other spacers are in front of the bracket. The forks have not been repositioned. Additionally, we have positioned the pin board so that this distance from here to here is equal to this distance from here to here. The stop block has been replaced and slid over to butt against the pin board and locked in position. To cut the pin board, the router is set up with the same 5/8 inch bushing and a 5/16 inch straight cutter. Adjust the depth of cut to cut the pin boards to be equal to the thickness of the tail board plus 1/2 inch. To cut the pins, this time we will guide the router on only the forward portion of the forks. All the waste material in between will be removed. Once again, set the router on the Omnijig to make sure that there is clearance between the cutter and the base of the Omnijig. After both the pins and tails are cut, check for fit. Perfect. If the joint is too loose, make your adjustments to cutting the pins by moving the template back using the rod nuts. If it's too tight, move the template forward, again using the rod nuts. As you notice, my pins project slightly above my tail piece. I like to cut my dovetails in this manner so that I can sand these flush and have a perfectly flush joint. The box joint, sometimes referred to as a finger joint, can also be cut on the Omnijig. This joint is generally used in box construction to provide plenty of glue surface on the interlocking fingers and give added strength to your boxes. It's also a very decorative joint and can be used in fine furniture construction. I use it regularly in my shop for small boxes and bins to hold materials in. Equipment needed to cut the 1/2 inch box joints includes a router, the box joint template, a 1/2 inch straight cutter, and your 5/8 inch guide bushing. The guide bushing comes with your basic Omnijig. Here you see the Omnijig set up to cut the 1/2 inch box joints. To cut the box joint, we use a technique similar to cutting the through dovetail. First, all cuts will be made on the front left-hand side of the fixture. And backup material, at least 1/4 inch thicker than the material being routed, is placed under the top clamp and butted against our workpiece to help prevent tear out. And then position your box joint template on top of the scrap material, making sure that the front edge of the board to the back of the finger slot is approximately 3/8 of an inch. I've marked the workpiece at the center and positioned it under the template so that the center is 1/16 of an inch to the right of one of the fingers. Once the workpiece is properly positioned under the template, slide the left front stop bar over and lock it down. We are now ready to make our cuts. The router is set up to cut the box joint using the standard 5/8 inch guide bushing and a 1/2 inch straight cutter. Depth of cut is adjusted to be equal to the thickness of the material being cut plus 1/4 of an inch. Place your router on the template and check to make sure that there is clearance between the router bit and the base of the Omnijig. Both ends of all 4 pieces of the box are cut in exactly the same manner. There we have the finished joint. There is no adjustment for tightness of fit with the 1/2-inch box joint. So far, I've demonstrated using the Omnijig to join boards at corners, but the Omnijig offers you another option, the tapered sliding dovetail. This joint is ideal for joining shelves to sides, such as in bookcases, stereo cabinets, and other types of furniture. Equipment needed to cut the tapered sliding dovetail includes the router, the dovetail template, 2 spacer washers, the 1/2-inch dovetail bit, and the guide bushing. The dovetail bit and the guide bushing come with the standard Omnijig. The template and the thin spacer washers come as a unit. Here you see the Omnijig set up to cut the tapered sliding dovetail. You will notice that this template differs considerably from all the others in that the router is guided in this direction instead of in and out of the fingers. The mail board is centered underneath the mail guide bar, and the router is guided on each side of the bar to cut a perfect mail dovetail tenon. The mail board is centered under the mail guide bar and butted against the left stop. To properly position the female board, line it up evenly with the male board and slide the top left stop over and lock it in position. The router is set up to cut the tapered sliding dovetail with the standard 5/8" bushing and the 1/2-inch dovetail bit. The depth of cut is set at 23/32 of an inch. The tightness of the joint can be adjusted by raising or lowering the bit. Once everything is properly positioned and the router set up, slide the female board back out of the way, placing the router in the male dovetail slot. Wait till the router comes to a complete stop before removing it from the template. Next, place the guide bushing on the opposite side of the male bar and make your second cut. Next, we are going to cut the female dovetail slot. Remove the male board. I've marked the center line of where the female groove will be. Additionally, a little trick I use is to mark over 12/32 of an inch from that line. This is half the width of the female slot in the template. Next, I will position the board so that that center line is directly in the middle of the female slot. I use the 12/32 mark that I put on my board to help me get the line perfectly centered in the female groove. Once the female board is properly positioned, lock it in place. We are now ready to make our cut. You must be certain to run the guide bushing down both sides of the female slot. The female dovetail slot is complete. Check for fit. Our final joint and a perfect fit. If the joint is too loose, lower the router bit and cut again. If it's too tight, raise your router bit. The Omnijig really is as fast, as easy, and as accurate to use as I've demonstrated to you. No matter whether yours is a home workshop, a small business, or a cabinet shop, the Omnijig will add a professional touch to your work that you will be proud of. Just think of the possibilities. From drawer construction to cabinets and bookshelves, cedar chests, or jewelry boxes, the Omnijig does it all. The Omnijig, from Porter Cable, tools for the professional.